In the 19th century, the belief in spiritualism, from ghost mediators like the Fox sisters to private seances, was on the rise. And it was easy to see why. Life was short and often cruel. Many advances in medicine, such as anesthetics and antibiotics, had yet to take hold. Death was always close. Magic was also popular, with extraordinary scientific discoveries being made so quickly that it was very easy to believe anything was possible. Electric power reanimating the dead? Sure. Magic glowing rocks called uranium made into makeup? Sounds great. What could go wrong? Oh. In this world filled with supernatural mystery, illusionists and entertainers capitalized on this belief in magic to astound audiences and clean up at the box office. On Wednesday, July 11, 1849, Heinrich Kellar was born to two German immigrants in Erie, Pennsylvania, and would grow up to become the most famous magician in the world. Americanizing his German name to Harry, he would soon be called Satan Jr. and the Prince of Magicians, becoming an inspiration for the Wizard in The Wizard of Oz. He was Harry Kellar. Kellar's story starts with a life-shaping moment. As a young boy, Kellar got his first taste of showmanship. Playing near some railroad tracks with other boys, he heard a train approaching. He stood motionless on the tracks as the train's whistle grew louder and louder, only to jump away at the very last moment. He felt the excitement of dodging death and the adoration from the audience of his friends. Curiosity also shaped him. When he was only 10, he apprenticed under a druggist named Carter. Alone in the drugstore, he would often experiment with various chemicals. These experiments eventually cost him his apprenticeship when a mixture of sulfuric acid and soda blew a hole in the drugstore floor. Instead of facing the wrath of his strict parents for losing his apprenticeship, he did what any sensible 10-year-old would do. He hopped aboard a train for Cleveland and began a vagabond life. During this period, he worked at a dry goods store, R.A. DeForest & Son, fed the presses for the Daily Cleveland Herald, and eventually left Cleveland for New York City, where he sold papers on the corner of Canal and Center, sleeping in the office of the Earl Hotel in exchange for being a night porter there. While in upstate New York, he saw a performance by the Fakir of Ava, a British-born magician named Isaiah Harris Hughes, who adopted the persona of an Indian fakir with dark makeup and exotic costumes to entrance American audiences. In the 19th century, it wasn't uncommon for British performers to don brownface, although this practice isn't seen today.
Oh, this is a barrel of monkeys!
Anyway, Kellar was amazed as Hughes produced silver coins from nowhere and changed paper shavings into milk. For his finale, he smashed a watch and fired a pistol at the pieces to have it fully restored. At that moment, Kellar had a burning desire to jump on stage and command the crowd like Hughes. And by pure coincidence, Hughes placed an ad in the paper seeking an assistant. Kellar immediately applied. His audition didn't necessarily win him the job, but the approval from Hughes' dog did. The 16-year-old Kellar started working for Hughes that week. By 1865, Kellar began to perform by himself. Later, in 1867, borrowing equipment and deep in the hole financially, he performed a show where he noticed the majority of his audience were creditors. Performing a new magic trick, he tied a rope to a piece of scenery and fed it out a window. At the intermission, he lowered his luggage, and then himself, and performed a well-timed disappearing act. Looking to work with others that would provide a little more financial stability, Kellar joined the Davenport brothers and Fay in 1869. The brothers Ira and William Davenport, along with William Fay, were stage spiritualists whose main attraction was a cabinet of mystery. The trick went something like this. The performers had their hands tied behind their backs with rope and were placed in a large cabinet. The doors were closed and spooky sounds and musical instruments could be heard inside. As the doors were opened, the performers were seen with their hands still bound, proving that it was spirits playing the instruments, not the brothers. In reality, of course, once they were inside the cabinet, they were able to loosen the ropes, play the instruments, and create the knocks and bangs. Before the doors were open, they tightened the ropes back on their hands. While assisting the Davenport brothers, Kellar felt mistreated by the troupe and also disliked their dishonesty about spiritualism. What's worse, the brothers would never tell Kellar how they escaped the ropes, forcing Kellar to figure it out on his own, possibly with the help of William Fay. Later in his career, Kellar would often give lengthy interviews to newspapers denouncing spiritualism as fraud, staging events showcasing how seances were actually done, and betting $1,000 that he could replicate the trick of any spiritualist. Leaving the Davenport brothers in 1873, Kellar started a world tour with William Fay, performing many of the tricks that he had learned. He became an expert at escaping the ropes himself and made $10,000 while in Mexico, which equates to over $228,000 in today's money. As a testament to his cleverness, rather than expose his earnings to possible bandits and corrupt officials, he encased the gold doubloons in barrels full of asphalt, which would be melted and broken apart later once they were out of the country. However, grifters did get the best of him in Peru. In Lima, he lost $1,500 in receipts and suffered a $100 fine for speaking directly to an audience member without clearing it first with the theater official, who would allow it, for a generous bribe. After this, Kellar always made sure a new country's officials were properly compensated. The lost $1,500, however, was paltry compared to the disaster in 1875 that would set him back. Leaving Rio de Janeiro, he and Fay boarded the royal steamer Boyne for England. Crossing the Atlantic and stopping at Lisbon on August 11th, the Boyne struck a rock in the shallows of the Bay of Biscay, between the Isle of Moline and Brest. 2 stokers were drowned, but 200 passengers and 156 crew members were saved. But all of Kellar's possessions sunk into the bay, leaving him completely without finances or equipment to continue the tour. Broken without a way home, Kellar was forced to sell the only thing he owned now, his diamond ring, and await passage back to America from London. While waiting, he visited the Egyptian Hall, an exhibition space built in 1812. There, he saw Maskelyne and Cook, 2 of the biggest illusionists in the world at the time. Seeing show-stopping tricks, notably a levitation trick, he knew he needed to learn how to perform them. Returning to the next show with binoculars, he attempted to figure out how it was done. Kellar's version of this was called the Levitation of Princess Karnac. The trick worked by placing a woman on a long, flat board hidden under her dress, with a loop-like arm and mechanism built by the Otis Elevator Company obscured from the audience's perspective. The apparatus would then hydraulically lift the woman in the air while Kellar passed rings around the woman to prove that there were no wires suspending her. Also adding a vanishing trick to his act, he paid another magician he saw perform at the hall, Poitet de Colta, $750 for a device to perform the vanishing birdcage trick. At this point, it only seems fair to talk about one major knock against Kellar. He wasn't a particularly great magician in terms of sleight of hand or even the ability to improvise when things went astray. However, he was a great showman and knew how to dissect tricks and borrow from what he had seen or had paid for. Kellar was more of a man of logic than a man of magic. More important than the tricks he saw in London was the idea of the Egyptian Hall, a static location for shows, allowing the performers to reduce costs and create more elaborate stage shows after taking travel and transport out of the equation. And in the traditional of Kellar stealing, or borrowing if you want to be fair, he took the idea of the Egyptian Hall, replicating his own version of it at the Gymnasium Theater in 1875, going so far as to call it the Egyptian Hall. Hey, why reinvent the wheel? While on tour, he returned to England to purchase another important piece of his show that he had seen back at the Egyptian Hall, a card-playing robot named Psycho. He commissioned a copy of the automaton, which looked like a miniature man that would play a game of cards, powered by a hydraulic tube underneath it to turn the gears.
Please make a wish.
It's creepy, that talks, that thing.
Returning back from South America and beginning to gain worldwide notoriety for all the illusions that he had acquired, Kellar was riding high, perhaps a bit too high, as following the death of a renowned magician, Robert Heller, the New York Sun ran a damning piece accusing Kellar of stealing his name from Heller in order to confuse audiences. Now, Kellar did steal a lot, but his name was not one of those things. In fact, Heller himself was born as William Henry Palmer and changed his name. Not only that, but Kellar's birth name was Kellar with an E, but he changed it specifically to avoid comparisons to Heller. Unfortunately, the public was not swayed and a backlash dogged him, causing him to cancel his US shows and return to Brazil. One good thing did come out of this. While on tour in Australia in 1882, he met a young fan named Eva Lydia Medley. The two began to write letters and postcards to each other and kindle a relationship that would later blossom into marriage. In 1884, Kellar opened up a new Egyptian hall in a rented-out Masonic temple off of Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. He started a staggering run of 264 performances, famously featuring his self-decapitation trick. After running for an entire year, the hall shut down on June 24, 1885. Also in 1885, Eva met up with Kellar at a performance in his hometown of Erie. She became a part of his show, playing the cornet and acting as an assistant before the two were married on November 1, 1887 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Kellar's act had been completely rounded out by this point to include all of his famous illusions, including the divorce machine or how to get rid of a wife, where he shot a pistol at his wife sitting on a chair only to have her vanish through a trapdoor during the firing of the gun. His act also included a blue room, a set of dark blue where many of his tricks took place. His marketing and posters of the time became second to none. These posters often featured whispering imps, small demonic creatures that seemingly whispered the secrets of the dark devilish magic into the magician's ears. These imps would be copied over and over on countless magician posters, even rivals. During Kellar's world tours following the last run at the Egyptian Hall, another magician, Alexander Herman, had become increasingly popular. Herman was a pure magician, a master of the sleight of hand, excellent with the card tricks. He was quoted in the press that Kellar relied too much on machinery and had no real skill as a magician, causing a feud between the two. This feud came to a head when both magicians were performing in the same city, with Kellar's agent hiring men to paste over Herman's posters with Kellar's, prompting Herman to cover up Kellar's posters, and an infinite loop of retaliation. Finally, the two men buried the hatchet and became friends. However, this was sadly short-lived as Herman died shortly thereafter on December 17, 1896. By 1908, his eyesight was failing him and his wife Eva was very sick. He named Howard Thurston his successor and started to tour with him. He had found Thurston in Paris doing card tricks and thought his skill matched with Kellar's knowledge well and would become a great magician. His penultimate show was in Ford's Theater in Maryland, and he built a mansion in LA at 495 South Ardmore Road. During his retirement, Kellar was often visited by contemporary illusionists and escape artists who considered him the dean of American magicians. One of his friends at the time was a young Harry Houdini. Houdini convinced Kellar to perform one final show in a benefit for families that suffered because of the sinking of the USS Antilles in World War I. Kellar agreed. The show was held at the Hippodrome on November 11, 1917, under the banner of the Society of American Magicians. Once Kellar completed his performance, he attempted to walk off the stage, where he was suddenly stopped by Houdini, who said, "America's greatest magician should be carried off in triumph after his final performance." Houdini then set Kellar down in an ornate sedan chair that was showered with red roses and chrysanthemums. Houdini and other magicians present lifted Kellar and the chair up to the sky as a 125-piece orchestra played Auld Lang Syne, giving the old wizard an appropriate send-off. In LA on March 10, 1922, Harry Kellar suffered a pulmonary hemorrhage due to a bout of influenza. Though mostly forgotten by today's public, modern magicians and illusionists everywhere owe him much. Though his sleight of hand skills may have been small, his personality and showmanship were bigger than anyone's.